Hello everyone, and welcome to my speedrun of Spacechem any percent in 25 minutes 14 seconds. This is a real-time speedrun of Spacechem, which means that I'm actually optimizing for not just the time it takes for the puzzle to run, or just the time it takes, the number of symbols. I'm actually optimizing for the time it takes to input the puzzle and have it run. That said, I find that it takes me on average a third of a second to input a symbol, or I guess to be more precise, a third of a second to click the mouse button. And so that means I can put in 3 symbols a second. And it takes me, or I guess takes the game a 400th of a second. The game runs 400 cycles per second at speed 4. If you look in the top right, you can see my keyboard inputs, and you'll notice I hit 4 to run the puzzle. It's going to run at the fastest speed. So almost all of these puzzles are optimized for symbols, because it takes me considerably longer to input symbols than it does for the game to run. There's going to be a couple of exceptions to this coming up, but a huge shout out to the folks who made the Spacechem wiki on Reddit, who have basically just optimized all of the puzzles for symbol count. There's a couple of tricks I'm going to pull here because not all the symbols are equal. So debond, or what I call wrong outputs and wrong inputs. So that's red outputting on omega, or blue inputting on, sorry, red inputting on beta, blue inputting on alpha, red outputting on omega, blue outputting on psi. Those require a right click, and that takes a couple of extra clicks and is a little bit slower. So I'm going to be avoiding those, and that's one of the main ways I'll be incurring more symbols. I also am going to avoid moving start and end points. The other trick I can pull is I can clone reactors with control drag. So here there's a very similar reactor you can build. It's maybe a little bit more complicated for the first one than necessary, and a little bit more complicated for the second one than necessary, but since it solves both tasks, it's really, really good to have. It winds up saving a bunch of time because I don't have to type the symbols twice. But as you can see here, there are going to be times when I move the start points, but I'm going to try and avoid it as much as possible, because placing an arrow to bring the start point onto the path is only one click, whereas dragging the start point is one mouse press to start and one mouse press to release. This puzzle here uses a glitch called bonder priority. But anyway, if you see me moving the bonders around in weird ways, that's why. I'm going to make use of reactor cloning again here. So with a slightly complicated first reactor, I can get both output products in the same output cell. And with a slightly complicated second reactor, I can have it handle both reactants. And that lets me clone this. And I'm also going to save the first reactor, because I'm going to use it in the next level. And once again, that just lets me copy, something that only really makes sense in a full game run, but is really a nice trick to have. So here nothing works. Yeah, I'm going to use 2 assembly reactors and this saved disassembly reactor. I also get to make use of a really cool trick called particle smashing up in this top reactor. You can bond over one of the nitrogens and it just goes away. It's really quite nice. So I'm not quite using the same reactor. I have to make a couple of adjustments, but it's still tremendously faster. There I misplaced the input alpha, so I had to move it out of the way, missing a bond. Well, I messed up my particle smash. It was not the cleanest chapter 3. Once again, I'm going to be building a solution that lets me copy this reactor. I have to just change one switch. These defense missions are usually pretty nice breaks, because I can take at least one of my hands off. Usually my right hand off the mouse is what I'm doing. But chapter 3 is definitely early game, and things are still fairly straightforward. But yeah, as you can see here, I didn't move the blue start point because it wasn't necessary. There's not much to say about Chapter 4. I'm really just using exactly the solutions that are the minimal symbol solutions, with the occasional slight adjustment, but one of the main things I'll do for these solutions is I'll swap colors when I can. It's often easier, since you start on red, to make use of red as your primary. This puzzle has a really annoying input pipe, because you get a 3-to-1 oxygen that you sort of don't need. I'm going to spend a little bit more time than is really necessary on this solution building a complex input reactor, which is going to split nitrogen and oxygen to the same output cell. I'm going to reuse this reactor, and although it's completely possible to have it output on 2 cells, and then have the next reactor, whatever reactor handles the input, just deal with the double grab. Since you'd have to do the double grab twice, but you only have to do the output handling once, it winds up being a bit cheaper on symbols. Similarly, there's a 4-reactor solution to this puzzle, which would be lower symbol count, but since I get to save what it looks like 19 symbols there, by duplicating that top left reactor, it actually winds up being fewer symbols. I'm pretty sure to do this 4-reactor solution. That said, I'm not super confident in my reactor designs, since a lot of these were just sort of me figuring out what seemed to work. Definitely some of them are not going to be low symbols necessarily. Like here, I'm having red do a bond operation that maybe could be done elsewhere, so that blue can do an output omega. I messed this up. Red needs to be output psi. In general, the biggest time loss you're going to get in these levels is a crash. Anytime that you don't input the solution perfectly loses not only the time it takes to fix the solution, but also the time it takes to debug what went wrong. Generally, as you do this run more and more, you start to recognize certain mistakes that you're making often, and that makes it a little bit easier to... No, it's a grab. That makes it easier to figure out what's going wrong, because you say, oh, this is this error. I know that means I've missed this bond symbol, or I forgot to move the sensor. This is a really nice solution to no need for introductions, because it gets a 3-cycle. It's also hands-free. I really did not find a solution, even with manual control, that beat a 3-cycle. A lot of the bosses are cycle-based, or auto-scrollers, or in other ways not really improvable. So the boss levels in general are where I'm going to be really, really trying to push the symbol count down. I just missed a clone operation. But in general, this run's doing pretty well so far. I don't really know what the biggest mistake was this run. There's also a couple levels like this one where there is a significant time delay. I think Unknown Sender in particular is not going to be sped up by adding more symbols. Or sorry, by adding more symbols. Just because there isn't that much to do with it. Oh, this level is terrible. This first reactor here is amazingly fast. Sorry, I'll talk about that in a little bit. This first reactor here is amazingly fast. It's basically the cycle limit, and it's extremely low symbol. But the design of it, the design of the solution, means that the piping between these reactors needs to be of a precise length. And it's really frustrating. I think on Linux it's actually easier, because you get better RNG. Anyway, Unknown Sender, and there's a couple of levels here which are slow. Unknown Sender in particular, I don't think it's really possible to improve with with more symbols, just because it's already pretty fast. It's like in the thousands of symbols. Here I'm doing some copy operations to save myself having to type the dbond symbol. It costs me basically 2 clicks to do a drag, a copy drag. Is that backward? No, that's right. 2 clicks to do a copy drag with 3 clicks to make a dbond instruction. So in general, I'm gonna prioritize making copying when I can, just because it saves me a bunch. This is another really neat solution. I get to build plutonium and then disable the plutonium generation back down to single hydrogens. It's pretty high symbol, but it's very, very fast. And it's one of the few bosses that can actually be sped up. More painful solutions. This isn't quite the low symbol solution. It's very similar though. Also, you'll notice in general, if I make mistakes, I'm just going to ignore them. Obviously, the goal is to place as few symbols as possible, but the amount of time it would take to correct the mistake is a lot longer than the amount of time it takes, as long as that mistake is not an issue. So bad arrow placements, in fact, are much more likely to see me correct them, just given how frustrating they are. Chemical sensors as well are some of the slowest symbols to place. So I've actually got a much higher symbol count second reactor here, but it doesn't involve any chemical sensors, so it's a lot faster to actually input. This is another puzzle that's very, very slow. The solution that we're using just builds these sticks, and it's very slow to do so. So it just takes a large amount of time to build, and definitely I could spend this time, maybe a 40 symbol or a 50 symbol solution would be faster, because it wouldn't be 9,000 cycles. Some puzzles like this one are styled after the low symbol solution, but what did I forget here? Oh, I screwed up my bonder priority. Wow, that's rare. So as I mentioned, I do have to be careful about where the bonders are placed, but I usually have a pattern that I can drag them from. They always spawn in the same locations. And that means that as long as I have a consistent pattern of bringing them to where they need to go, it's fairly straightforward to build them the right way. This solution to Gasworks Park is very similar to the low symbol solution. The only really main difference is some slightly better placement in that first reactor. The second reactor is identical. I haven't found a better way to set up the second reactor. But I've made some slight timing adjustments to it so that the piping is easier. There's a lot of piping, there's a lot of precise reactor placement in the low symbol solution, and this gets around a lot of that. But this is a case of the reactions running it basically as fast as possible, or at least as fast as I've seen as possible. Whereas here's an example of, you could make this a lot faster with more symbols, but this runs in only over 1,000 cycles. So unless you can save 400 cycles in only 3 symbols, it's going to be very hard to beat. Here's another bonder priority solution. So you can see me being really careful with my bonders. There are multiple ways of setting up the bonders, but I don't know all of them. So it's easiest for me to just build them the way I want. This is a solution of my own devising. All the low symbol solutions out there are really either not designed to run at maximum speed, or very slow, or require a lot of really bad symbol placements, like a lot of debonds on the wrong, a lot of outputs on the wrong color. The main trick here is that you can, well, there's 2 tricks here. One of them is that you can leave excess garbage in that bottom shaded area, and as long as there is, actually it doesn't even matter if there is a ruby crystal. Every time a xenon is input, which is just every 250 cycles, the system will just discard all of your garbage. So it's a really great way to deal with that. The other trick I'm making use of here is called wrong output. I'm actually going to build a molecule that has a chromium on the bottom right as opposed to in the middle. I don't know if you can tell, but I guess top right. And I have to make one debond and rebond to make it work, but it allows me to build entirely L-shaped units, which just makes this reactor a lot simpler. That's one of my highest symbol. It might even be, I think it's second or third highest of the entire run. In general, I prefer low symbol solutions as well, just because they're a lot easier to memorize. So, like, there's probably a better solution to this one. It's just this one is low symbol, and I just haven't found a good alternative. It's low symbol, but a lot of the symbols are really painful to input, so there's probably a happier medium, but around chapter 7, which is where we are now, is where I sort of lost stamina for trying to correct for the better solutions. This was one of the few that I still did, just because this chlorine sensor is not required for the low symbol solution, but you have to be using a chlorine sensor to not have a tremendously slow solution. So. Here's another small example. I put a down arrow next to that input beta. It's one symbol, so it doesn't cost me that much time to do. But it saves over the course of the run, maybe like 200 cycles, so it winds up being worth it. Small judgment calls, and they probably aren't critical everywhere, but there's always this sort of interesting balance between things that I technically are faster and trying to remember things. So I think at this point I probably wouldn't try and improve this solution, or sorry, this run, unless there was a reactor copy that was found. Just because anything else, like, there's enough fluctuation between solutions that I'm really not going to have a great amount of success, and this level is one of the main reasons. So don't fear the Reaper. I'm making use of a 2-reactor solution here. So we're just going to relinquish control over one of the 2 directions on the laser, where it's only allowed to ever go down. And that means that it spends some amount of time facing straight, and then some amount of time facing down. And we just have to hope that not too many asteroids come up, or we're going to die. This is RNG. As you can see, my previous run, one that I'm comparing against here, has a minute 20 to save. I get a really lucky first couple of asteroids. You can take 4 hits up top. And basically, you have to survive till cycle 6000. And as long as you do that, you kill the ship. So this is my 3rd hit. I'm getting a little bit scared here. Anyway, this is, yeah, I actually gave up on that. I think I was looking at the radar and I could see 5 coming. I don't recall exactly. But basically, you have to do this. If you choose this 2-reactor solution, you have to get lucky. And that makes running against this really, really hard. That minute 20 is versus perfect attempt, which I think I got once. This is a 2nd try, which is still very reasonable, and only loses maybe 30 seconds, 20 seconds. So unless there's a really big time save, I wouldn't want to grind this out, because trying to race against this is just a pain. And that top rock barely doesn't get you with this solution. It's very close. 23 seconds. Okay. We're entering into chapter 8, which it's probably the hardest chapter. Just because of the sheer difficulty of the solutions. The solutions are just, they're really long and complicated, and they don't have a lot of room for error in particular. They're just these very precise systems, and it's not even that I don't understand them, though there are a couple that I really just did not ever take the time to figure out how they worked, beyond doing the very basic, like, you know, what symbols that are currently grab only can I make grab drop, and so on. but they're just very complicated, and they take a lot of effort to memorize, and they take a lot of time to input, and they often take a lot of time to run as well. In particular, Sigma Ethylene is probably my least favorite level. It was the last one I ever memorized, and it's just really brutally hard. You'll see me making really good use of symbol copying here. It doesn't save a lot, but it adds up over the course of the run to be quite nice. And there's small things like I changed this sensor to become a hydrogen sensor. It wasn't initially, just because that makes a lot fewer clicks to actually create the symbol. But yeah, this is probably this is the longest chapter. I've done what are called individual level runs, where you sort of just start at the beginning of the chapter and run all the way through it. And this chapter, by far, it's like a minute slower than the next closest chapter. And I could probably improve that time, and there I think are some better solutions. I stopped really pushing the individual level runs once I had all of them done, just because I didn't want to keep practicing those when I could be practicing 80%. A lot of really tough symbols, and a lot of room for error. This is also probably the level that has the highest variance, chapter has the highest variance. Most mistakes where something will crash. I don't know what it is. This is another level that, aside from being ridiculous number of symbols, is also very slow. So even a 70 symbol solution might be faster there, especially if they were 70 good symbols. But this puzzle's a little bit of a nice breather. It's actually very easy to figure out how it works, and it's very clear there aren't many optimizations to it. And there's only a couple of really painful symbols to input. When we come to this level, this is once again somewhat of my own solution. It's styled off the low symbol solution, but I'm making a couple of changes to it, mostly because this is the end of the run, and I really want things to be a little bit easier for me. So there are solutions that have a lot more controls. In fact, I have only one control in this, which is an input limiter. Just because I want to make this puzzle as easy to do quickly as I can, especially when I'm a little bit worn out at the end of the run, I'm a little bit shaky. So this puzzle is going to go blue, red, green, red, blue, red, green, red, just alternating over and over and over again. And, well, it covers all three colors, so with a little bit of manual work, you can put the extra inputs in when you need to. If you look in the bottom pipe between the bottom two reactors, you can see there's a little bit of buildup. If that buildup occurs every time I'm a little bit too slow, turning it off and on again. If that buildup reaches 3 molecules, I'll crash. So there's a little bit of pressure on me. And now we come to end of the line. It's another solution of my own devising. Again, based somewhat on the low symbol solution, but has some notable differences. Primarily, I'm not using the extra product off of this omega pseudoethine. It's just not necessary. A very carefully crafted 3-to-2 splitter in the third reactor lets me use all of the carbons in this ethylene and just turn them into both the 3 carbon sticks for the final reactor and the xenon. You can do the math on it yourself, but basically it's going to be 3 to the xenon fuse and then 2 to the bonding pairs, and then I've got blue counting to know when to output a xenon. But this final reactor is straight out of the minimal symbols. Well, there's some slight adjustments to avoid moving the start points, but that's it. I've got one limiter on this reactor, one sensor, and it's limiting the top reactor, which is what controls the missile firing, the Omegas for the missile firing. This ship will cloak the moment you fire a missile. It has to be locked by a laser before you fire a missile, and then it's 10 missile shots. The missiles have some aiming, so it doesn't really matter where the ship is. I got really lucky here, and the asteroid stayed basically completely out of my way. I think I only lost one missile. And that made for gold and for really a great finish to a great run. I could definitely knock, 15 seconds off this run and get a sub 25, but as I say, I'm not really incentivized to come back to this category, unless there's another reactor copy or reactor save that's found, or a major improvement to one of the more painful levels. I wanted to give a quick shout out to the folks who have run this game. I think there's two other main runners, S and I'm going to get his name wrong. It'll be in the description. And also a shout out to the Spacechem Discord. They were very helpful in giving me low symbol solutions and helping me work through some of the harder reactors and solutions in this. And thanks everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this run. I enjoyed practicing it and routing it. It's really a great game.